In this episode of the Toughen Up Leadership podcast, why in the world does your team not listen to you? I mean, you're the brains of the operation. You've got all the knowledge and you have all the answers. Well, maybe that's why. We'll talk about that. And also, you may or may not have heard that nearly 30,000 tech jobs just poof in the blink of an eye. But what you may not know is how they were let go, and that will shock you. And that is the episode. Are you ready for this? Then let's toughen up, Buttercup. And welcome to the podcast. This is Jason Kistler, and I appreciate you spending the time with me. Another interesting show today. I think the first thing I want to talk about is the idea that your employees don't listen to you. Now, some people may not have this problem. Some people are more naturally disposed to inspiring people, but a lot of people may struggle with the idea of how do I get my employees to listen to me? Because for whatever reason, I'm, trying to get the team organized and move forward. Maybe I just got the position, things are new, and I cannot seem to get my team to follow instructions, to respect me as a leader. There's a couple of things related to that. And I think one of the biggest things is credibility as a manager. So if I come into a new position and maybe I didn't come from the team or from that type of work, maybe I'm a manager of a software team, but I came from networking, then there may be a small credibility gap, because people like to understand that when they get instructions from a manager, that there's some sort of idea that they know what they're doing, that they understand why those types of instructions are being issued. So, if I tell somebody something that they don't think makes sense and they look at me as, well, but you're not even a developer. How do you know anything about this? And that does make it difficult. So one of the biggest things is to really work on credibility. Now that is the responsibility of you as the manager to say, what do I need to do to become credible? I'm not going to learn a programming language, or maybe I do. Maybe I learn enough to become credible. But regardless of what it is, there may be a skill gap that's preventing you from being credible to the team. And that's, of course, not a problem with all teams, but there are going to be, especially in tech, we've seen it a lot, where it's difficult to get your team to follow you if you're coming from a different background. Now, another potential issue with your team not listening to you is the opposite problem. You are too much of a know-it-all. And there are a lot of people that come from the team maybe, or at least from that same industry, and they think that it's their job to have all the answers. And they think that by demonstrating their vast knowledge that they're demonstrating their credibility. Well, if you are the type of manager who doesn't really take input from the team, you think you know everything, and so you know exactly how things need to be done, and you're going to go ahead and do all the things that need to be done the way you want them to be done without any consideration for anyone else on your team, then you're going to have the same problem. There's not going to be any respect or motivation, because the team's not going to feel recognized. Your people are going to be thinking, well, what difference does it make? He's the one that knows everything. He's doing everything. It doesn't matter what I say. Well, that's not a good place to be as an employee, to feel unappreciated. Another cause It could be you're not giving enough recognition to your team members, that maybe they want to, they want a little bit more recognition, maybe give them some praise about, a good job that they've done. But these are the kind of things that people really like to understand that they're contributing, that they're doing a good job. And so if you as a manager are not giving that type of feedback, you're not giving people credit, you're not trying to lift people up, then you're going to have the same issue. You're not going to have the credibility, and you're not going to have a team that's willing to go to bat for you constantly, that's willing to do the extra effort to make sure that you look good. And that's kind of the point, is if you can really make your team look good, then they will automatically be able to make you look good, and they're going to want to. So these are the main reasons why your team may not be listening to you, may not be responding very well to you. There are a couple of other reasons as well. One of them being that you're the type of person that doesn't follow through. And that's another big issue with people, is they look at you and they see, do you do what you say you're going to do? Do you follow through? Do you keep your promises? If you say you're going to get something done, do you get something done? Or does the team have to keep reminding you, hey, you told me you were going to get me that information so I can move forward with this, whatever happened? That's the kind of thing where if you constantly do that, you're going to start to lose more credibility. People are not going to trust you. They're not going to trust that you're going to get the things done that you say you're going to get done. And so they'll start developing ways to work around you to get their job done. And that's not what you want. So I think that's another big thing. You got to keep your promises. And it could be something as little as, I told you I was going to get you a document by the end of the day, and 2 days later I finally get it to you. You didn't say anything to me. I just finally followed up and gave it to you. But in your mind, you're thinking, well, I really needed it by the end of the day. And, I may have gone off and done other things while I'm waiting, but I'm still thinking about the fact that I didn't get the document like you said I was going to. Therefore, that's a strike. And if you keep doing little things like that, it's going to add up to, oh, well, he says it, but, he rarely follows through. So I'm not really going to consider what he says as honest or truth. So that's a really big consideration. And it's easy to get yourself in that situation where you're losing little bits of credibility here and there, and then they start to add up to something huge. So let's review quickly the things that you can do to help build up your credibility, to get your team to listen to you, and your trust. So to go back over, credibility is an issue. When you come in from another position, another type of job, maybe you don't have the same skill set as your team, and so there's a credibility gap. That's on you to be able to learn as much as you can to be a credible source of information. That doesn't mean you have to learn the entire skill, but you need to at least know the lingo, understand what your team's talking about when they say certain things, understand system infrastructures, that sort of thing. You need to understand all those things when you're talking to your team. They don't necessarily expect you to be able to do everything that they do, because they're the individual contributors. They expect you to lead them in a direction that makes sense. And how can you do that if you don't really understand what they do? So that would be the first thing. The next thing is the trust, the credibility of trust. So all those little promises you need to keep. Don't say you're going to do something and not do it. Be a person of your word and be genuine. And the third major thing, like I said, give them credit where credit's due. Build your team up. It's not about you looking good. It's not about you having all the answers. Build up your team so that they look good. Give them credit where they do something really good, where they do something really well. Give them credit, give them some praise for good work. Make sure that they're feeling appreciated. Give them that feedback so that they know that they're doing a good job. And that should really help you if you feel like you're having issues with your team listening to you. Those are the major reasons why you may have that problem. So making those adjustments, I think, will get you on the way to finally having your team listen to you. So moving along from that, this news story has been pretty big lately, and I want to get this right because these are big numbers. So Google has laid off 12,000 people, and Microsoft is due to lay off 10,000 tech jobs, and Facebook is projecting laying off 18,000 tech jobs. Now these are big numbers, and sometimes it's difficult when you don't even have a company that's even half the size of the number of people that are getting laid off. Sometimes it's hard to appreciate the kind of magnitude that we're talking about here. But when they talk about laying off a good 5% of their workforce, or 10% of their workforce, or 15% of their workforce, those are pretty significant numbers. And a lot of people are wondering, why is it that so many jobs are just deemed unnecessary anymore? And, that's a discussion for another day. The real concern here, and what I wanted to talk about, was the way, and I'm focusing on Google because this is the story that's been out lately, and it's been on YouTube, about the way that Google let their employees go. And I have just a couple of anecdotal stories about the method that was used. And then I'm going to talk about I think some of the goodwill that was burned here, that people are going to start looking at these large tech companies with a pretty harsh negativity because of the way they're operating, because they don't appreciate the fact that they're dealing with people's lives here. But in Google, apparently, when the decision was made to let a large portion of people go, nobody was even told until it actually happened, until you couldn't get in the building anymore. Your access card didn't work. And so the morning that this happened, there were lines of people outside Google buildings not being able to get in. Just nobody told them. They're getting, people were showing up at 4 a.m. to start work, and they couldn't get in. And so they're calling their boss. Their boss doesn't even know. And that's another thing, is that imagine being a boss and you have no idea that half your team is getting let go. And then they're calling you like, what's going on? And you don't even know. So one woman that had been laid off essentially tried to log in remotely, got kicked off, is texting her boss, calling her boss, trying to find out what's going on. She has no idea. And then finally, Google sends out emails to people's personal accounts, directing them to a news story of the massive layoffs. So there's no communication. There's no verbally, or facing a person and, talking to them about it. There's none of that. And so there's a couple of issues with this method. I mean, yeah, it's nice for all the executives and the upper managers that don't have to deal with the fallout. All they've got to do is deal with the people that are left. I think that's a coward way out. I think if you're going to let somebody go, you should face them. It's not a matter of necessarily arguing or debating with them, but at least having the courage and the professionalism to look them in the eye and say, look, this is the decision that was made, and have that discussion. I know that I think a lot of the younger generation is more into the communicating via text and email, and not necessarily as much face to face. And so maybe this is the way that things are starting to be done now, as these younger people become, managers, executives, whatever. But I still believe in the fact that if you're going to fire someone, it's kind of like breaking up with somebody. I mean, if you send somebody a text that, we've been together for 5 years, but now I'm breaking up with you, I think that's pretty cowardly too. So it's kind of the same thing. If you're gonna do that, then you really should be strong enough to be able to be face to face. So, the goodwill that was burned here is really that a lot of people are going to be looking at this and saying, I would never want to work for a company that's willing to do that to their people. And I think that a lot of tech jobs are going to start shifting to these types of smaller companies. People are going to look at this and say, this is the behavior of a large company. I've never been at a company that has laid off people that way. In fact, I've actually had to lay off people, and I called every single one of them individually. We were remote, so it's not like we were in the same office, but I called each one of them individually to let them know, to tell them I'd be happy to give them a reference, and just talk with them. Not just, hey, you're let go and bye. No, talk with them. You're dealing with emotions at that point, and so some people may be fine with just saying, okay, fine, thank you, but other people may want to talk, and as a person who was their manager for maybe a while, it would make sense for you to at least have some compassion, some empathy to talk to somebody like that and say, look, I understand, you know, I get the fear that's coming on, and I can do whatever I can do to help you. I mean, this is just human being stuff here. This is nothing, I would say, extraordinary we're talking about. We're talking about having a little bit of compassion for someone who just got a pretty large announcement that's going to affect their life. So maybe in the technology field, that's a little bit harder for a lot of managers who may not have that kind of empathy to deal with. And so they just want to be done with it. I get it. It's the easier way out, but it's not the better way. So I can tell you from my own experience, this is why I don't choose to work for large organizations. I think the human factor escapes a lot of those large organizations. And so, to be at scale, a lot of times they have to do that. I mean, you are talking about laying off 12,000 people. So that would take a week at least to get to everybody. And if you're trying to do it all at once, then I understand that it's impossible to have a touch point that says, okay, I'm going to talk to every single employee and make sure that I do this face to face. I get that that's not necessarily feasible in a situation like that. But there are other ways that could be done. And I think management involvement is also a big deal. It shocked me to hear that even the managers were not aware that their employees were being let go. And in most of the scenarios that I've seen, usually that information trickles down into management shortly before they have to give the news. So usually management is involved and understands. They may not necessarily have a choice. I mean, sometimes, an executive could go to a manager and say, look, I need you to cut your team in half. And that's it. So then you are left with the decision of, okay, what half do I want to keep? But that's not always or even very often the case. So I get that, logistically 12,000 people, that would be complicated. But the way that it was done, I think just shows how the human factor is completely gone from these big tech companies. And if you're comfortable in that type of an environment, then by all means, there's probably a lot of opportunities. They have a lot of money. They deal with a lot of, newer technologies, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, when I look at something like this, the Facebooks and the Microsofts and Googles, and they'll hire people as quickly as they fire people. It seems like these technology companies, they're kind of almost the canary in the coal mine for recessions and bad economies coming, because that's effectively what's happened here. Is we came out of COVID, and obviously COVID was a huge deal. People a lot of people lost their jobs, a lot of jobs went under, a lot of companies had to shave down things. And then when we came out of COVID, they hired like crazy. And unfortunately now, because of a recession that is looming, they're preparing for that. And so they're laying off a lot of people. And I think in some ways that's a little irresponsible, but that's the way companies are like that. The big companies, they've got to ramp up quickly and they've got to ramp down quickly. And so this is what they do. So just my thought on it. Like I said, when I was reading these stories about people and how they were let go, and the guy that shows up at 4 a.m. to get a report done before everybody else gets into the office, and he can't even get into he can't even use his access card. The woman who has to find out from the news about the layoffs before she can get an answer from anyone at Google. I think those are just, again, that reinforces the need for human leaders, more human leaders, more compassion, more empathy. It's just, in some of these large companies, it's just not there. And that's going to do it for this episode. Everybody have an amazingly productive week.